Good morning. It is 9 a.m. We will remain at recess until such time that we have a quorum. Good morning. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We are on Chapter 12, Miscellaneous Provisions. The First Amendment is SB 276 TMT L10 P137. That's line 10, page 137, proposed by Speaker Therese Terlahi. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But before I begin this amendment and my time starts, I'd like to make a point of order. So in reviewing this chapter, there's several sections that are, it's called miscellaneous provisions, and several of these sections make changes to the law. I'd ask that my time be stopped. This is a point of order, not a...
Timekeeper,
Thank you.
just
And
stop
that,
the time.
anyways, the section is making, the chapter is making changes to sections in the current code, our current law. The problem is, it's very hard to tell what changes are being made because they're not shown. In other words, the additions to the current code are not being underlined. The parts that are being deleted from the code are not being struck through in this whole chapter. I've seen this in several sections. So Section 6.02D of our rules say very clearly that in any repeal or amendment to existing law, any matter to be omitted shall appear with strike-through, and any new matter shall be underlined. And the chair of the Committee on Rules shall return to the prime sponsor any bill which violates this section as determined by the chairperson of the Committee on Rules. And I know that this section is intended to give notice to the public, and of course us, right, to understand exactly what we're deleting or adding to current law. So I don't want the bill to be returned to the sponsor. We want to finish this budget, but I'm just asking that I think before we act on it, everyone should have notice of the changes to those sections. So as we go along, I've been informed by counsel that she's informed the committee that this should be complied with, but it's not. So anyways, that's my point of order, and I'm just asking that the sections we're going to affect, that should be either offered as a floor amendment by the OFB or the Committee on Appropriations, so that it shows what changes we're making to the statute. But otherwise, I'm ready to begin with my first floor amendment.
Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Chair, why don't we just move along? This bill was introduced as a substitute. I know it's a thick document. I know there's many pages. But we'll move along with the amendments, and then we move forward, and if we identify a certain section, then we make the correction. We ask legal and the clerk to make the technical correction or update. But we move on. All right, folks, just be reminded that we hope to vote on the bill by Wednesday. That's our day to vote. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine.
Yeah.
Speaker, on your point of order?
Yeah, simply, it's really a matter of when we're looking at a section, do we know which changes we are affecting to the current law? And let me give you an example. It's my first floor amendment. There's a sentence being added to current law. Part of this is already in law, but we as senators cannot tell which parts are being added and which ones are existing from looking at the bill. And so, of course, we can't tell, the public can't tell, and I'm just saying we're going to be voting on things without that kind of knowledge. But I'm willing to move forward, but I just think that needs to be pointed out in every section, like what are the actual changes being made to the law, because they haven't been laid out.
Mr. Chair, point of inquiry.
Senator Tadiwi.
Could I make a motion then at this point to request that anything that does make this substantial change as we move forward through this chapter, that it is brought to our attention? I think it's important to know if we're changing current law, that any changes to that is brought to our attention. That's all. I'm not saying take the bill back and redo anything. I mean, I know we're under a time crunch here, but I think it should do that. We shouldn't just let this go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just a...
Thanks, Senator Tadiwi. Yes, so I would recommend that, I guess anyone who's proffering an amendment, just make it clear that your amendment is amending another section of the Guam Code.
No, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Is that what
It's
you're
not the
requesting?
amendments. The amendments are in good order, I think. it's the bill. It's the bill, it's this chapter of the bill as written. Yeah.
Let's move on, Mr. Chair.
Senator,
Apparently,
Augustine?
there is a list that exists of all the code sections that were not delineated here, and yeah, I would agree that as we go along, those be shown. Which parts of this bill are changing current code and how.
Okay, I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, I'm trying to understand the point of order. The request you're making is that throughout the miscellaneous provisions section, that any area of miscellaneous provisions, you're not talking about the amendments now, you're talking about just the any area be pointed out where it's changing Guam code?
That's correct.
Okay, let me take a moment's recess.
Committee rules back to order. Let's move with the First Amendment. We have, Speaker, do you have an amendment? Line 10, SB 276, TMT L10,
All right,
page
well, I'm
136.
raising a point of order on Section 31, Mr. Chair. Section
All right.
31 does not show, it says it is amending the code to read, but it doesn't show the amendments.
What page are you on?
Page 135. I'm raising a point of order on Section 32. It says it's amending the code as follows, and it doesn't show what the amendments to the code are. Section 33, it says it is amending the code to read as follows,
135?
and it doesn't show us what the amendments actually are.
You're looking at section what, 31?
31, 32, 33, 36, 37, 38, and 39, and I got this from the list that the council has provided to your staff, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
I'm prepared to begin my amendment.
Mr. Chair, if I
All right.
may.
Madam Vice
Point of-
Speaker?
Point of inquiry. Would it then be feasible that if legal counsel move to make any legal corrections as necessary in each of the chapter, I think that motion might help it. I'm just trying to help here so that we can move along. So
Yes.
maybe a motion will be in order, and I can yield it back to the speaker or make that motion now in the interest of time.
Go ahead and make the motion.
Mr. Chair.
Unless-
All
Madam
Yeah, no,
Speaker.
the issue is this. Before we vote on these amendments, we need to see what we're actually changing. After we vote on them, it's going to look like this. It's going to look clean. They will look exactly like this. And in the engrossed version, they will be cleaned. In other words, the strike-throughs and the underlines will be gone. The problem is, while we are talking about these sections, we can't tell which is our new language for the code and which is the existing language for the code. And that's the whole part of notice. Like, senators need to know, what are you actually amending in this code? Which word? And the public should know which word changes we are making to existing code sections. I'm ready. I would ask that those sections, as noted, that maybe that be provided to all the senators. I don't know how we're going to get that notice to the public at this point, unless we stop deliberation, which I don't want to do. I'll show you the example in my first
So we'll
amendment,
just
Mr. Chair.
continue on, go to your amendment, and we move along. And then as you identified, if you find it and you identify, or anyone finds it, so note it, so that we can at least to move along, and then we'll get back to it before we close the chapter. Would that be sufficient?
Yeah, I'm not going to do it, Mr. Chair. I'm asking that your office do that.
No, I didn't ask you to do it. I said we'll get back to it before we close the chapter.
Yes, thank you, yes.
Thank you. So please proceed then,
All right.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you. So my
Your
first
amendment.
amendment is on Section 32 of the bill, of this Chapter 12. So Section 32 right now says, this Section 80104H2 of Chapter 80 of Title 21 is hereby amended as follows. And you see no underlining and no strike through, but I'm telling you the amendment to the current law is, beginning with, and 50% of the net proceeds of the lease of Lot 10192 transferred by the federal government to the government of Guam by quitclaim deed in 2002 and now utilized by the telecommunications company AT&T, both under the jurisdiction of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. That is a new lot being added to this section of the law. So the current law already authorizes Ancestral Law at Lands Commission to get 50% of the net proceeds of the lease of the other properties, the Apra Harbor Reservation F12 and Parcel N14 Polaris Point. This amendment in the bill, as the bill is written, is adding another lot for ancestral lands to get 50% of the proceeds for operations, for for this certain fund. This is their, it's called the Survey Infrastructure and Development Fund, but it's also the fund used for operations. And they made it very clear they want this money for operations. The problem is all of the proceeds of these leases are supposed to go to the land bank, right? They're supposed to be stored in the trust to the land bank. And that's the proceeds that are going to be used to compensate ancestral landowners who are not getting their land back. For example, the Tizen properties that we kept for the airport, they're supposed to be compensated out of the land bank. So any property that we take the lease proceeds out of the land bank, which is what this amendment, or which this bill proposes to do, reduces the amount available for ancestral landowners to be compensated. So that's my issue right now, and because there has been no compensation to ancestral landowners out of the land bank yet. And there's some money in that bank, but not enough, of course, to make any real compensation to these landowners. But they're still working on their rules to compensate these landowners. So I am very hesitant to agree to a bill that takes proceeds out of the land bank that are intended for ancestral landowners before we have heard from those ancestral landowners. In other words, through a separate bill or some other mechanism, because this was never put forth in the public. And so my amendment to this current bill would be to just strike the entire section, because striking the entire section would leave in the law the current proceeds going towards ancestral lands operations, but not add another land lease towards those operations today. And I'm saying, maybe it's a good idea, Mr. Chair, and maybe we can do that in the future, but I'm very, very hesitant to do that without any notice to landowners that we are removing proceeds and potential proceeds from the land bank. It's been a big issue over many years, compensation to these people from the land bank. They need the rules done. They've been inconsistent with the rules, their agreement on the rules, and they need to resolve that and start compensating them. So, so I hope that I made that clear. So the first two parcels, they will still get that. Even by my amendment, that's already in the law, right? So they will continue to get half of the proceeds of the first two parcels for operations. My amendment takes out that second parcel. It doesn't allow that second parcel to be removed from the land bank. And this is important because the AT&T lease may be renegotiated. As you know, they worked on a settlement couple years ago, but it may be renegotiated, and it may now include the submerged cables part, which is, if it's significant, will be a significant boost for the land bank, and hopefully get that to the ancestral landowners, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone like to speak to the amendment? To Section 32? Senator Tyree?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the author of this amendment, and to point out the other areas in this chapter that we should be very conscious of, and that is certain amendments that actually change the current law, and these amendments should have a public hearing. You know, I know that everyone wants to be able to put their, their 2 cents into this budget bill, their favorite projects into this budget bill, but we have to be conscious that many of these need the public hearing to have the public input, especially the agency themselves, to be here to discuss why would they want to put this in the bill in the first place, or did they request for this, and why did they put it in there? And we don't have that luxury right now. Transparency. We all talk about transparency. Certain amendments that are being placed in there should have that transparency and involve the community to put their 2 cents into it as well. So I stand in support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tyree. On the amendment, Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Situs Masi, Mr. Chair, and if I may, I want to further clarify this and make sure that we're not taking something that already exists based on the this amendment that has been proffered by the speaker from Jonia. And if I may, just to get a further clarification, I'd like to ask for just a moment's recess to verify in the books, because it was also noted that there wasn't a public hearing, and I'm just wanting to make sure that we're not taking out something that's already in there. So a moment's recess to clarify with legal on this matter, please.
We'll take a moment's recess.
Committee rules call to orders from recess. We will now continue on with, Madam Speaker, you had your amendment? Oh, wait. Oh, corrections, Vice Speaker, you had the floor. I apologize.
Mr. Chair, yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to legal, the sponsor of the amendment, and just to converse with you, Mr. Chair, and maybe just an explanation of how this was interpreted based on what has happened with this section and the verbiage that was done in the original bill and the hearings as it relates to the public hearings. And as I understood it, I thought the interpretation that is with the deletion of section 32 on this particular amendment, that it would take it away, and that's not what was interpreted to me. And I know that this had public hearings. I know that this is why this was in the original submission, and maybe a question to the good author of this amendment is the portion as it relates to the lease of lot 10192. Because if I'm not mistaken, in previous laws, there was an agreement as far as the utilization of this company. So I guess my question is, did we not want the fund, at least 50% of that fund from this lot 10192, which was in the original bill, underlined, go back to the Ancestral Lands Commission? Maybe I'm still a little bit confused, and maybe you can share what the perspective is, Mr. Chair. I know you're sitting up there, but I just want to make sure that the Ancestral Land Trust doesn't lose any of the proceeds that should go there, because the Opera Harbor Reservation on F12 and parcel N141, those proceeds, if I'm not mistaken, goes in, and I have the 21 GCA in front of me, Mr. Chair, and maybe that's what my question, if the good speaker would yield. I really don't want to oppose this, but I want to make sure that whatever needs to go in to the Lands Commission, Ancestral Lands Commission, that it goes there, and that we're not taking anything away, and if we are, where's that 50% going to? But I do know that we had public hearings on this, as the bill in general. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Speaker. Do you yield to the question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. And you're right. I went back and looked, and so the bill as submitted by the governor did have this provision in and had underlined the words and 50% of lot 10192. So the governor showed us that that's what she wanted to do, was to add the AT&T lease proceeds to the operations of ancestral lands. And my argument against that is that these AT&T proceeds currently go to the Ancestral Lands Commission trust fund called the Land Bank, which is specifically for landowners. So by doing that, we're taking that money away from the landowners. We're supposed to be compensating them, and we haven't yet. And so I don't want to reduce the amount available to compensate the landowners without at least coming up with the plan first to compensate the landowners and show them where they're really going to get pennies as compensation, or they're going to get dollars, or they're going to get hundreds of dollars. No one knows yet. So I don't want to reduce the land bank, the trust fund. Doing this, as the bill reads, would reduce the land bank trust fund. Doing my amendment would keep everything status quo, meaning yes, we are, and we have approved AT&T lease where Ancestral Lands is getting the proceeds, but they're putting it into the trust fund, and that's all I'm asking the body to do, is to keep it in the trust fund, not let it go to operations right now, not today. Until they come up with their plan, to compensate the landowners from the trust fund land bank.
All right?
So,
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, if I may, maybe just for clarity, because when you look at the strikeouts, it takes this section all the way up to parcel N141. It's in the provision of that, and maybe keep that in, but just delete the portion of lot 10192. And maybe,
Mr. Chair, see, if I may.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
This is the confusion caused by not having the underlines just in the bill, because they would see right away what's the new provision, right? And now it's very confusing. But no, if you know, I am deleting the entire section of the bill. I am not deleting any section of the code of the law. I'm deleting from our bill today, meaning I'm deleting any action on the law. We're going to leave the law in place as it is.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay.
but sir, it has a notwithstanding provision is my concern. And that's where in good faith effort, I'm just bringing it up because I want to make sure that if it's
Okay.
in 21 GCA and it's striked out here, one can assume that the deletion will be taken. And again, maybe we can make it a little bit clearer or all that. I'm just,
Then we'll have legal give her opinion so we can end it. Would that suffice, Madam Vice? Because at the end of the day, as whatever we discuss throughout the remaining of this budget bill, legal, when they do the engrossment, they have to make sure they do all the scrubs to make sure that everything is legal. And that the intent of any amendments is fulfilled. Not just legal's opinion, no. The intent of amendment is fulfilled. And if the intent was not to strike out what's in the code, then legal has to make sure of that. And I think that's what the speaker's concern was to make sure that we maintain what's in the code, and whatever's added is taken off. So with that, do we have any other, Madam Vice, do you have anything else other than that? Then
I mean, maybe, okay, just to be safe, the motion to give legal the technical authorization to fix this if necessary, because it does, what's in 21 GCA shows a strike through in the amendment is covered, and I just want to make sure that Ancestral Lands Commission doesn't get any money taken away from them. And like I said, I want to work with the
Yes.
author of the amendment to
Yes.
make sure that all the money goes to Ancestral Lands Commission. Just to be safe, sir.
so that's the motion, right? You're placing
That's
the
the
legal
motion, sir.
takes them.
To
Does
authorize
anyone like
legal
to
case.
speak to that motion or any objection to that motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Senator Nelson.
On that motion, I get it, we can ask legal to make those kind of corrections, but what is interpreted when we speak is very different from the interpretation of what we put on paper. So if that is a motion, I would recommend making an amendment to this amendment would be a clearer course of action so that we understand how we're going forward. And so I'd like to call a recess to make an amendment to this amendment.
All right, then we'll take hopefully a quick recess so the amendment be proffered to fix this. Thank you, we're in recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order from recess. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After getting further clarification, it seems that the request is to keep the current statute whole, whereas this amendment, if we remove this amendment from the substitute bill, we'll keep the current statute as is. The issue was with the situation of the added verbiage to read the 50% of the net proceeds of the lease of Lot 10-192 transferred by the federal government to the government of Guam by quitclaim deed in 2002 and now utilized by the telecommunications company AT&T. And then that's the added verbiage that we would change to the current statute. However, the amendment that is before us deletes the whole provision in the budget bill, which would allow the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission to maintain 100% of the funding to give back to those that own ancestral lands. So speaking with the previous speaker, that is the intent, is to keep the current code whole. So I support this amendment because if we remove this amendment, we keep the current code whole, and then the people will get what they rightfully deserve instead of putting aside money to hire more personnel. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So you're in agreement with the amendment?
That's correct. I support
Okay.
this amendment.
Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment?
Mr. Chair, do I need to withdraw my motion?
Oh, that's right, we were still at the motion, I apologize. She had a motion for legal to make the, no, I think we should still move with that to allow the legal to do whatever technical corrections she needs to make. Are there any, anyone who would like to speak to that motion? Because the previous speaker was going to speak to that. Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I understand what the discussion is about. I think that very simply is, the amendment should just basically say delete section 32, period. Okay? It just delete section
But
32.
are you commenting to the motion for legal?
Well, yeah,
Any objection to that, or?
but it's convoluting and it's complicating the issue even more with that. I don't want to object to it because I see the intent to it. But I'm proposing a simpler fix to the thing is say that section 32 of this bill is deleted.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, are there any objection to the motion? Senator Tyree.
Mr. Chair, this is the amendment to the amendment that we're
No,
voting?
it's a motion.
Okay, to withdraw her
No.
amendment. Or,
No.
Okay.
The motion is for legal, to allow legal to make whatever technical and ensure that whatever's in the act is fulfilled by its intent. Do you agree to that or no?
no, Mr. Chair, I think
Yes.
let's just, Mr. Chair, it's as simple as just deleting the whole section 32. That's it. Nothing else is needed. There's nothing legal can do to make that even stronger than it already is, and just making the motion to strike out 32. It's as simple as that, Mr. Chair.
But that's not the motion. Motion's for legal. Are you in agreement or not? Objection or no?
No object, okay,
Oh.
so that we can just move on and vote on the original amendment.
All right. Let me just call for the vote for the motion to allow legal. Yes, Senator Paris. Good morning.
Good morning. Just a quick question. Oh, sorry. Is she on the?
Hold on, Vice Senator Paris.
Yeah, just a question, point of inquiry regarding the, in chapter 2, or sorry, chapter 5 of the bill, there was an appropriation from the Guam Ancestral Lands
Are we on
Commission.
section 32?
Yeah, it's related to this.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, would this have an effect on what was appropriated previously in the bill?
We're-
Or is
we're-
it separate?
We're discussing the motion first, and then
Okay.
we can go into that. All right? Do you have, if not, I'm only at the motion right now, so we can settle this and move on. Because I understand what my previous colleagues mentioned, but do you have any comments for the motion? Objection? Support it or not?
Well, a point of inquiry, but I can wait till we finish,
Yeah,
dispense with
let's-
this motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Dueñas.
Mr. Chairman, I guess maybe where I tend to be a little confused too is this motion currently for the entire chapter? Or is it particularly pertaining to this amendment? Because if we delete this amendment, simply put, the amendment's just gone. And so there's no legal correction to be had to that amendment. But
That's correct.
So I'm trying to understand, is this proposal for the entire chapter or just
No,
for the
it's-
purposes of this amendment?
It's just for this amendment. In the event it passes, because there's no objection to it,
No. I think that would be a subsequent
Yeah.
motion because if
Okay.
the chapter is deleted, it's not going to make a difference. I concur with what's being said.
All right.
I just wanted to understand that because I know it's proffered, but I don't know whether it was proffered for the chapter or for, thank you, Mr.
no.
Chairman.
Thank you. Madam Vice, do you have you were signaling or no?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, my intent was sincerely to make sure that everything stays intact. And whether it gets deleted or not, in the event something were to happen or come up, that if we allow legal counsel to make necessary corrections, if an interpretation was different elsewhere, whether the compiler of laws or anybody had a question to this, that my sincere intent was making sure that Ancestral Land Trust Commission gets its funding source. That was where my intent is. And
Okay.
sometimes you just gotta put the protection in. There has been an objection, but I'm asking just to make sure. If anything else comes up, that at least we know that.
It's for record.
Yeah.
Understood.
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw my objection if that's the case. We'll just move forward.
Very simple. Are there any objections to the motion if legal is needed to intervene, would intervene? There being none, motion passes. Now we're back to the amendment. Okay? The amendment, as proffered by the Speaker, Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question for the proffer of the amendment. So does this amendment affect what was previously appropriated in a previous chapter?
Can you state the chapter so we can all follow you?
Yeah, it was in Chapter 5 when there was an appropriation to the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission of $408,553. So would this have an effect on that, is the question, to the
Do you have a
proffer of
page
the
number?
amendment?
When you identify the chapter, could you identify page number so
Sure.
our colleagues will follow along as you make comments?
It's page 52.
Page 52. And your question, you have a question you'd like to proffer to the sponsor of the amendment? Could you state your question first before I ask if she would yield to that?
Yeah, the question is, by deleting this section of the bill, Section 32 in Chapter 12, does that impact what we appropriated in Section 5 of the Appropriations Bill on page 52?
All right. Madam Speaker, do you yield to the question, the inquiry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the backup documents in front of me, but my educated guess is no, because this amount reflected on page 52, the appropriation from the Survey Infrastructure and Development Fund of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission is the exact same amount that was appropriated last year without this amendment being made to the code. So they're getting that much already, so they should continue to get that amount. And also, Mr. Chair, we did add amendment to the bill in miscellaneous appropriations to add another $90,000 for the additional employee for ancestral lands. And if
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Perez, did that suffice?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't see you. Yeah, thank you. That answers the question. If I have, I guess, a follow-up question. So, is this the first time that this money is being received? And if not, where was the money put previously? I guess this is for the Appropriations Chair. This is
Senator
proper.
Parrish, you're asking me a question about our amendment or about what? What did you see in the budget is what did you see in the budget?
No,
If you're asking something about our amendment
yeah,
to delete a section, then you want to proffer that question for the author of the amendment.
Yeah.
But that's what we're discussing is the amendment.
Well, I guess it could be to the chair or the proffer the amendment. So what's new, I'm sorry, I'm not objecting to the amendment itself, but I'm just, it has raised, I guess, a point of inquiry regarding the lot 10192. Since this was in 2002, I believe, it was transferred from the federal government to government of Guam in 2002. Were we receiving any funds prior, and where did it go?
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Speaker.
Thank you. Yes, the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission has been receiving proceeds on Lot 10192, the AT&T lease. They receive proceeds now. All of those proceeds are going into the land bank. This bill would have taken them out of the land bank. My amendment intends to keep them in the land bank for now.
Thank you for that.
Senator Parrish.
I appreciate it. And I do support this amendment. I think it makes sense because I think we should keep this sacrosanct as far as the land bank goes. There's a lot of, landowners that will never get their land returned in their lifetime. And I think it's important, I understand that they're working hard to get the rules and regulations squared away. And I do have confidence, considering that they are working hard to get that finalized. I think many of us in the community, would like to get compensated for the taking of land. And it's important that we keep these funds sacred and protected. So I rise in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Parrish. Senator Blanche, you have comments you want to make for this amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I understand and I agree. First off, I understand the concern of the author of the amendment, and I agree with her in as far as wanting to keep it intact. I think the whole issue here is whether or not, if you look at the way this amendment is read, it says to amend section 32. If the intent is to actually delete section 32, then we delete section 32. Because if you amend section 32, then section 32 still exists. Because you're amending a section that we're trying to delete in its entirety. So, like the proffer, that we just basically say delete section 32.
Thank you. Are you going to proffer an amendment to that? I mean, I understand where you come from.
I understand.
Senator Blanche.
But, again, I know what she's trying to protect. I agree with what she's trying to protect. I think that we're just getting wrapped around the axle with regards to the technicality because, again, if you amend Section 32, that means Section 32 still exists in this chapter. But if you delete Section 32, then you just delete any, and the law still stays in place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone like to speak on the amendment that has not spoken yet?
Just a point of
Yes, Senator Ty.
information,
Point of
Mr. Chair. We've already have an amendment to the amendment. Okay, so any more amendments is, we can't do it, right? So just wanted to do a point of information, right?
There's no amendment to the amendment. It's just, no.
Oh, it's
she
just
supports
technical?
it. Yeah, it was just,
Oh, there was a motion, just a motion. Okay, so we still have the opportunity for another amendment to the amendment. So,
right?
yeah, okay, that just clarifying that there is a possibility to make an amendment to the amendment, and the former speaker just has one just to delete it, this section.
I think if he's not proffering it, we're
Okay.
going to move along.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? On page 137, section 32. None. Are there any, Speaker, do you believe you need to close on this?
I would like to just
Okay.
say one more thing, and that is, when we look at the land bank, the money that's supposed to be going to these ancestral landowners that has been sitting for a while, not yet gone out, we've also looked at the collections of the Ancestral Lands Commission on these trust funds. So they are managing these properties in trust for the landowners who are supposed to be compensated. But what we've seen is deferral of lease proceeds, and now request to take the lease proceeds and use them for operations instead. And so I think it's, it's very important for us today to leave the lease proceeds in trust until they execute this plan to compensate the landowners. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Are there any objection to the amendment on page 137, line 10 to line 19? There are no objection. Amendment passes. Colleagues, we will now move to the next amendment. The next amendment proffered in this chapter is SB 276 TCN, line 10, page 137. We're now at Senator Nelson. Your amendment, ma'am.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Ava?
This is adding a new section to this chapter, and I think it should fall in line with all of the other amendments that are adding new sections to the chapter. And we all were, to add new sections, we're all taken in the order of submission. This is one of the later submissions.
No, this is the page that it was introduced.
Right, but I could have come in with all of my amendments and say I'm going to
But you
add a
did-
new section to the beginning of the chapter, as opposed to where we're putting all our additions is to the end of the chapter, Mr. Chair.
Understood. It came in time. You didn't submit yours, so we'll proceed on to Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson.
Mr. Chair, if I, point of inquiry, Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr.
When-
Chair. Do I have
When
the
did this
floor?
submission,
Oh,
point of inquiry, I'm just
Okay.
wondering, I haven't
you, Mr.
seen this amendment before we opened up the chapter. Can I get a time with clerk as to when this was
Stand by.
submitted, please?
Let me make this very clear. When we were discussing what was on 12, I stated we were trying to get it into 11, where it would kind of like be in the appropriate, and then there was a debate on 11 that it's too late, so I said we'll restore it back to 12 to when it was originally submitted. It's back on 12. So, being that, this amendment was proffered, went through the clerks. If you didn't see it, that's not on me. It's here, it's in the order as they were received, and we'll move on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for
Okay.
that. My question was that when it was first in 12, supposed to go to 11, my question is, when was it submitted? It was submitted to Chapter 12 before the deadline, correct?
Way
That's
before
correct.
the deadline.
Okay, just wanted to
Yeah,
verify.
it was clear.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
Senator
you.
Nelson, please, let's move along with your amendment. Folks, we have quite a few amendments,
Thank you.
and we need to wrap this all up because Wednesday we would have to settle everything and get ready to vote. August 31st is when we need to pass a budget. So let's move along. Colleagues, Senator Nelson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe also there may be an amendment to this amendment by one of our other colleagues. But this amendment is to add, and I put this here in Section 32 because we mentioned the Guam Memorial Hospital. And so in Section 32, right before that. So in Section 32, the authority of Guam Memorial Hospital to recruit and hire long-term specialty doctors and for the sum of $5 million shall be appropriated from audited surplus revenues from the fund balance of fiscal year 2022 is hereby appropriated to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority and authorized for the purposes of the recruitment and hiring of specialty care physicians that provide qualified advanced care for diagnosis and treatment that shall include but not be limited to gynecologic oncologists, autoimmune specialists, urogynecologists, gastroenterologists, and maternal fetal medicine specialists. And so, Mr. Chair, there has been concerns in the community, and we saw it even in the last week's news that there's a shortage of OBGYNs, and also we are very well aware in other hearings that there's a shortage of specialty doctors. And so my concern is that, there's been talk about it's based on the needs of the population, but however, we have this, it seems to be a common practice of ours that when we have an ill individual in the family, we have to leave off island to seek further treatment and care. And so really this is just an assistance so that our island community won't have to leave off island for care, that they'll be able to stay on island and receive the care that they need, especially because of the cost is so great. The cost is so great to leave off island, and many of the families struggle with this cost. And just last week, I was on a call where one family had to seek assistance to just buy their plane tickets to take their sick child off island and receive treatment. And so this is some of the challenges that we've been facing for years. This has become a generational problem. This has become a generational challenge. And so I'm hoping that my colleagues will support this because we want to ensure that there is specific funding set aside so that we can have these specialty care doctors on island. I humbly ask for your support.
Does anyone like to speak to the amendment? Senator Taitui, on the amendment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, earlier I gave a rundown of how much funding in excess revenue on FY22 is available, and we're going down that list, and I'm working carefully with your office too, OFB, to go down that list to see how much funding is there. Right now, we're looking at only about $20 million left over from the excess revenue. We still have 2 more months. We're anticipating revenues in our special funds to go down. We all anticipated it was going to be $7 million from BBMR in shortfalls on special funds. OFB estimated $5 million, but guess what? We came in at $8.6 million in shortfalls just for the month of July. And it's anticipated to go even further down in the next couple months. Last year, it was $20 million in shortfalls. So that's on the financial part of it. We want to be able to have some type of cushion, as mentioned, when we go into the fiscal year 2023, because it's not going to be raining federal funds for us anymore. The PUA and what is generated into our taxes, the additional funding coming into our taxes, it's almost over. It's an artificial economy. That's the financial perspective. But what this bill does is throws money in areas of specialty care. There is no doubt in my mind that we need specialized doctors coming to Guam in certain fields, especially in the field of diabetes for endocrinologists for children. But it has been proven many times over that specialized doctors cannot stay and sustain themselves in Guam with a population of 160,000 people. This is the same issue that happens in rural America too, in areas where the population is very low. A specialized doctor cannot survive. The good thing about Guam is that we're at least able to have some specialized doctors coming in through, like, for instance, SDA. They bring a specialized doctor once a year or every 6 months if they're able to do it. But it's been proven that we cannot have these specialized doctors coming and being able to sustain themselves. Again, on Guam, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but if people have done their research on this area, you will see how difficult it is to have them coming to Guam and set up shop here. We can only hope to bring them in on certain times of the year, and like I said, other clinics do that. But $5 million to be set aside and held up for areas that specialized care physicians, oncologists, specialized gastrologists, maternal fetal medicine specialists. This is something that I don't think $5 million is going to get a doctor who specializes in that area to stay on Guam. Mr. Chair, and I know I've got about 6 minutes left, but you're looking. I would like to bring in, especially some of these other bills that are coming in, to bring in Guam Memorial Hospital. Because none of us here are doctors. None of us here can run GMH. And I think this would need us to bring in the hospital, the administration, to come in and ask our questions. And Mr. Chair, there are some other amendments coming up with regarding to the labor ward that's also coming into play. And I think it would be a good opportunity to have them come in and allow us to ask questions moving forward. So I know you keep looking at...
Senator Tyree,
Yes, sir.
do you have an objection or support for this amendment? That's what we're talking about, this amendment. And I think you expressed
Mr.
your
Chair, are
opinion.
you rushing me? I still have 5 minutes.
No, I'm
Are
not
you trying
rushing.
to take away my 5 minutes?
No, you can keep your 5 minutes, Senator Tyree. This is what I'm asking you. I'm trying to
And I will
ascertain-
speak all the way to the end. I know we're
Please.
talking about this bill.
Then
this
continue.
amendment to the bill.
Continue, Senator Tyree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're talking about $5 million going to the hospital for specialized care, and that's what I'm bringing up. And now I'm asking, Mr. Chair, if you would allow the administration of the Guam Memorial Hospital to come down into the Committee of the Whole to answer our questions. Can we do that, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair, I don't know, point of order.
Your clock is ticking. Are you have anything else you want to speak on this amendment?
I just asked you a question, Mr. Chair. Are you ignoring me? I mean, the
I sure-
process here, I asked you a question.
You asked me a question, if you can bring them on, then put
Okay,
the request in. But finish
that-
up on the amendment, please.
I first asked you, Mr. Chair, since I still have 5 minutes to go, and keep the clock ticking, go ahead. But I just asked you a question, Mr. Chair. Can we bring the Guam Memorial Hospital administration into the Committee of the Whole to discuss this, please? Go ahead, subtract 10 seconds if you'd like. I'm okay. But I'm asking you a question, Mr. Chair. Can we do this?
We could ask them to come.
Okay, I appreciate it. Mr. Chair, if we could, then that is my request, to
Okay.
ask that Guam Memorial come into the Committee of the Whole to answer any of our questions, especially as we talk about this amendment, and there's going to be a prior amendment coming up, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So, based on your comments, it's a support or objection based on, I was trying to understand your comments. Is it a support or an objection to the amendment, other than the request from GMH? I just wanted to know if you were giving. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Thank
I
you.
just said my two cents.
Yes,
I put
yes.
my study into this, and that's all I did. Now,
Okay.
whether you're asking me if I'm supporting or objecting to this, I'm not saying anything at this point.
Okay.
I'd like to hear from
Good.
the Guam Memorial Hospital, so then I
Thank
can
you.
make a sound decision.
Thank you, thank you. Does anyone else like to speak on this amendment? Madam Vice, and then followed by Senator Brown.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I do have a question, but for the purposes of supporting or not supporting this amendment, I'm going to tell you that I do, in my heart, support this amendment, especially as one who knows the trials and tribulations of trying to bring specialty care here. And for those that know that there could be good specialty here, but it's how do you get them with the resources that is needed because of all the other areas, even nationally, where the money for these specialty doctors are nothing compared to what we can afford, which is really hard. We here on our island continue to give good, try to give them the compensation and try to keep up with the national level, but it's not always easy. I will share with you, Mr. Chair, that I do have a question to the author, if she could yield, only because I went to a couple of meetings. To the author of the amendment, how will we evaluate the specialty area most needed, and what scale are we using to incentivize? I want to share again that I support the idea and purpose wholeheartedly. I just wanted to make sure that we prioritize the most critical specialties. And I say this, Mr. Chair, on the inquiry is because I am the only one who showed up to two physicians recruitment roundtables, and there was a bunch of proposals that the physicians discussed, and I just want to know exactly how the approach, what exactly the approach will be. This amendment does, however, put us in the right direction. I must say that. So I'm just inquiring about the mechanism on how we are getting there. And if, Mr. Chair, I'd like to note for the record that I do have notes of those roundtable meetings that I received an invitation and I went to. I can offer that also. So if the good amendment, the proffer of this amendment, like to share with me how we can take that, I would most appreciate that.
Thank you. Senator Nelson, do you yield to the questions?
Yes, thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. This is $5 million to recruit and hire doctors so that they don't have to spend one time, come here to Guam, spend a couple days on Guam, and then leave and come back in 6 months. The reason why we are looking to recruit and hire doctors, specifically for Guam Memorial Hospital, so that we ensure that it serves the greater good for the population, for the people of Guam, not just specialty clinics where they're able to bring in these doctors and then people have to fight for an appointment and go, and sometimes not even be able to be seen by those specialty doctors that are brought in for the clinics. And really, I leave it up to GMH for them to discern where they're most needed. Speaking with different doctors out in the community, and we don't have to look too far, it's also in the news, but personally speaking with different doctors out in the community, they know that there's a shortage in these areas. And if we want to say that, oh, it's population-based and that's not enough for them, it's the reason why we're not hiring doctors is because we're not willing to invest the money to keep them here. So we'd rather have our people break their backs and leave off island and suffer through that and take their family member and have to endure whatever injury or ailment that they have to endure the plane ride of 7+ hours, and then when they land, they're not even seen right away. And sometimes it's just for a consultation. The doctor's not going to act on the ailment or what is triggering the illness. It's a consultation. Some of their family members, they die during the process of treatment. And so I know I can hear everyone saying, what's the point? What's the point? Well, allow me to speak my piece. Because this is the reality of the thing. It's not about population-based, it's about having the money to be available to. And that's why I'm asking that we appropriate this money to Guam Memorial Hospital, because they have the expertise and they know what is needed in the hospital. They know the type of doctors that are needed in the hospital. And if you attended a roundtable hearing, perhaps make an amendment to make this amendment better. If you have that wisdom, I'm open to that. Please share, because I am not the sole subject matter expert in this, and I'm glad my colleagues want to take part in this. Because we all know that we need to have permanent doctors here, and even if we have to pay an extra cost. And then we have to work to ensure that we can incentivize our current doctors that do practice here, that do make the sacrifice. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to answer that question.
Thank you, and I can hear the passion, Mr. Chair, from the proffer of this amendment, and I want to share with her that I will share my notes, and I know that this is not going to end here, and if this is a start with this $5 million, I support it wholeheartedly. I think, Mr. Chair, I need the proffer of this amendment to know that, and I did preface that. And I know it's that important, and I know we need the expertise, and I know we need the specialty here. I just wanted to see if we can, I'm not going to make any amendments right now, but that I support this because I need to know, are we going to look at the specialties out there? We all know that we're short of gynecologists, OBGYNs, pulmonologists for that matter. My husband is still off island and he can't come home because that expertise and that specialty is not here, Mr. Chair. And I feel for the patients who cannot and don't have the resources to go back. So yes, I take the time, and yes, I will give my notes and I'll append it to this journal, to this bill, because it is that important. But I support the amendment, and I want to thank her, even with their passion, because we don't have the specialty here. We don't get the specialty here fast enough. And if this is a way of showing this $5 million as a start, then I'm going to have to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the amendment. Just hoping I can continue to work with her and know that I do have information from the doctors that have a plan in place to work with this. I also work with the Committee on Health, and that's my thoughts. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Nelson?
I'd like to motion for a recess so that we can have GMH come down here, come back at 1 o'clock, please.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the request is already made with GMH. And if it's not 1 o'clock, I'll confirm it. If we just wait 1 minute recess, so I can confirm it's 1 or
Can-
1:30.
wait.
Whichever one, so we can get them here, so they
Thank
can
you.
answer. Yes, ma'am?
Point of information, sir, if we're going to go that route, then I'd also like to see about public health or whatever. If this is the route we're going to take, I just
Well,
wanted to throw it in.
Okay,
We'll
the
take
only
a
reason
moment.
why GMH was asked, because it was asked by the colleague. Now, stand by. Excuse me, when you ask for public health, does it relate to similar to what? Because the amendment is here
Yes.
for GMH, it's not for public health. That's the only
Yeah,
reason why. And as I look through all the amendments, it's only GMH that's coming up. So I just don't want us to bring in somebody that,
I'm
there's no
just-
amendment for them.
And the only reason why I'm saying that, sir, is because public health has the same issues with specialty needs.
no.
I'm just food for
Well,
thought.
and I agree with you, Vice, but I'm just saying is that if the amendment doesn't impact public health, I don't want to bring them down, and would love to see public health. What we'll do is we'll reach out to them, see if they're available, and ask them to still come. All right, colleagues? We will 1 minute recess. Let me confirm they're going to be here either 1 or 1:30. Thank you. Committee Hall is called back to order. We will recess until 1:30. GMA's folks will be here. My colleagues, please be ready to ask your questions. We will not be, and also Public Health is being called also. Ask your question of the officials, and then hopefully when we get to the amendment, the question's already answered. Okay, and we'll just try to move along with this. 1:30, they'll be here. And I think it will impact, 3 or 4 amendments here so far. Thank you. Recess to 1:30.